Yeah, that's right after it was over.
Yeah, we waited a little bit just to clear out. Take the notch to clear up. There was a bunch of people in there, and it was pretty cleared out by the time we got through there. But once we hit Millsfield, it was and all through Errol. After I got past the line, it cleared up into the and that was a disaster. Absolutely. I mean, it took me 6 hours to get to that.
Okay, so what we want to do, we want to start out by looking at the side by side.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good morning to everybody here. We're ready to go ahead with this morning's work session.
Some of us are.
Yeah. Okay, we have 2 bills on the docket for this morning to discuss in the work session. Both Senate bills, Senate Bill 378, which is relative to the Performance-Based School Accountability System Task Force, and SB 526, it deals with school facility condition assessment and school building grants for temperature control. We're going to start out with 378, and I believe the committee members were handed out a side-by-side on that was prepared by our staff upstairs, and Jen is here in the room. Does everybody have a side-by-side? You're all good with that? That's what we'll be starting up, because that takes the current law, and then on the right-hand side, it goes down with what's been proposed in the Senate bill. Jen, I do not have any extra copies. Are there copies of that back there on the table? Okay, we may need a couple up here on the table up here. Okay, now this is a work session of our group right here. From the department, it looks like we do have a representative from the department here. Welcome, Caitlin. I saw your other 2 walk in here a second ago and they disappeared. They were going back to DOE. But let's start right off with the side-by-side. And this is a bill that's looking at the performance-based, yeah, come on up, Caitlin, School Accountability System Task Force. And what we can do is just walk down through that law with the first Roman numeral there on the side-by-side, which speaks to that at least every 4 years, the commissioner shall review the performance-based accountability system and make recommendations for future legislation to the Legislative Oversight Committee. That's in law. That's now. Now, that process is being overhauled. Do you want to speak to it, Caitlin, in a little bit, or do you want us just to charge ahead?
Sure. Sure. I can talk about. So, the bill that you guys have in front of you is not intended to replace the existing law right now. So we have the existing laws in place. This is not a repeal and replace or anything like that. What we're trying to do is say that we need continuous improvement of the existing law of RSA 193E and the PBAS, which is, I want to remind everybody, PBAS, Performance-Based Accountability System, is one of 2 measurements that are supposed to ensure that schools are providing an adequate education. And so there used to be a task force in law that looked at that, the PBAS measurement and refined that. And
Okay, can you hold on just
Yes.
1 second right there, Caitlin? Turn to page 570 in your statutory books here. And when you get there, that's section 193E3-C. 570 is dealing with the performance-based. And what Caitlin's talking about right now is what we changed in law 4 years ago. And if you look at the bottom of the page, 570, on the left-hand column, you can see the historical and statutory notes in fine print. If you go down to Roman 1, about 4 lines down, you can see where we had at one point, we replaced, it said the commissioner may establish a task force to assist with this review. So we had it there before,
There's May.
and it said may. But this is not law now.
So actually, I'm talking about further, and if
Do
there's
you have the new one?
no, this is
Or
2016,
do you
2017.
care to have a blue one to look at as we go?
I don't.
Would you like one? I got
Sure,
an extra
that would
one.
be helpful. But the point that I'm trying to make is this is an old task force that used to be in law. It says there is hereby established a task force to develop the performance-based accountability system. And so that's really what we're trying to bring back is a super old task force to kind of continuously work on that, not the commissioner's May task force that currently exists.
Can you repeat that one more time, please?
Yeah, so the old bill, so it says there is hereby established a task force to develop a performance-based accountability system that beginning in 2011-2012 school year will serve as one method of school use to demonstrate by the end of the school year that is providing an opportunity for an adequate education. The commissioner shall be the chairman of the task force and shall appoint no fewer than 9 but no more than 13 members to the task force consisting of the department personnel, one or more representative educational experts, parents, guardians, blah, 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 blah. So that's the old task force that the department is
That was
really,
back in the days when Heather Gage.
Correct.
And we were changing from No Child Left Behind to
so those are separate task force. So you're
Yeah.
talking about the Federal Accountability Task Force,
Yeah,
which is
yeah.
the ESSER task force. This is a performance-based accountability system for the adequate
But at
education.
that time, we also made these changes right here from what
Yes,
you were reading.
yes, that is true.
Yes,
Mr. Chair,
yes.
I'm lost. Does this task force still exist? And
No.
if so,
No,
is-
no.
The
That
task
was-
force has gone out of business, but you're speaking to the task force that used to be in business?
We're trying to bring it back. That's the purpose of this bill is to bring that task
And Mr.
force
Chair,
back.
you're referencing language in the statute that appears on page 570. I'm trying to understand how this relates to the contention that the task force should be brought back. Can you help me understand what's going on with respect to the request for the task force to be reconstituted and the language the commissioner may establish a task force? Is that what you're saying, that this now becomes permissive under this statute?
Yeah, as we get into our
What- what's-
discussion, you're gonna find out how this, the purpose for the task force, what they're gonna do in terms of looking at some of the indicators that you're looking at and determining whether we are providing, the assessment or the performance-based accountability system's working or not.
So do I understand that the task force that is referenced here on page 570 does not currently exist?
That, it was removed in 2020.
It was removed in 2020, 4 years ago.
Okay, so the task force that you're referencing went out of business. This task force is out of business, and we're talking about reestablishing a task force.
Yes, but there's different, the task force doesn't have to respond back and get approval from the Legislative Oversight Committee as this is written. So it's taking that committee out of the business. I know it talks about recommend, but it doesn't say approve. That's the big difference.
So the challenge is that the existing PBAS is in law. The department, the task force, anybody doesn't have the ability to change the law without the authority of the legislature, as much as we would enjoy that power. So that's why the department would recommend something to the legislature, and the legislature can then design a bill, or they can say, no, we don't like it, you're stuck with the existing law. But we don't have that ability outside of the law right now. And that's why this task force doesn't say the legislature will do something, because you already have we don't need to tell you that you can make laws. You are well aware that you can do that.
Okay, let's wait on down through because we'll have further discussion that on page 4 of the side by side, where you do change the report coming back and being approved by the Legislative Oversight Committee. That,
I don't have the side by side, so.
okay.
Yeah, I think Jen went to get them.
That, we went to get them. Representative Cascade?
Is it a good time to just ask a question? I mean, because I knew of this task force before. And annually, the commissioner is supposed to report out, right, a summary of this accountability system. And everything is shall. And then it says the department shall annually prepare that detailed report. And then in the historical, where it does reference, you just read it, the task force, everything was referencing the commissioner or designee shall be the chairman of that task force. So what I'm questioning now, it's, the task force is not in the law currently, right? It was removed. Now that's only dated 2020. And I guess I ask, why was a task force removed from the law? Was it replaced with the Legislative Oversight Committee or not? Or did they go hand in hand? But why are we going back to something we had before that I'm guessing worked?
So,
And it makes sense, but I'm just questioning, well, why did it get thrown out? And we're sitting here talking about who's gonna be on a task force, doesn't make sense to me, but
so I think, yeah, so I think we have a couple different things.
Okay.
So we've got to remember there's essentially two parallel but not the same accountability systems in theory in this state.
Excuse me, Jen, can you make sure that Caitlin gets
She
the
just,
side?
yeah, she just gave me.
Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
yep,
So we have the need for an accountability for an opportunity for an adequate
Got it.
education. So that is state accountability. In the past, schools used to be able to prove that they are providing an adequate education through the IBAS system, the input-based accountability system, or the performance-based accountability system.
Okay.
The department used to run those kind of comparisons, run the IBAS. I'm sure you filled it out many times.
Yep.
And then if a school did not provide an adequate or could not prove it was providing adequate education through the IBAS system, then we reviewed the PBAS system.
right, okay,
So that was the past. And that is still kind of the system, except that in maybe 2020, I think it was, this committee and the full legislature changed the or to an and. So now schools must prove that they're providing
Oh,
an
they have to do
adequate
both. I
education
remember
through
that.
IBAS and through PBAS. So
Right.
that was a big major change.
yes,
At that same time, I think that's when the task force was taken out. The department also was supportive, and I was part of that supportive, was trying to tie the state accountability system for an adequate education to the federal accountability system designed in the Every Student Succeeds Act. Now, since we have started trying to implement some of that, we have found that there are some challenges, and we really think that we need to look at the opportunity for an adequate education and the system that defines that. And then the other parallel accountability system is the federal accountability system that the state is required to implement as part of the Every Student Succeeds Act. And so we're doing that with using all of our federal funds that we receive, that we do that. And we are required to determine schools that are Title I schools, that are the bottom 5% of schools. And then we're supposed to determine them as CSI, Comprehensive Support and Improvement Schools, and then provide them additional resources. So that's what we do under the federal law. The additional resources comes from the federal funding. On the state side of things, we started kind of going in that direction because we said, all right, it's the same assessment. And we do want to make sure that we are leveraging existing processes as much as possible when we're doing this work, because one, we don't have tons of extra resources to do two parallel accountability systems. It's confusing why there would be multiple accountability systems, but at the same time, the opportunity for an adequate education is not what is in the Every Student Succeeds Act. They're very different legislation, federal legislation versus state legislation around an adequate education. And so a year ago, when Nate and I were here in front of you all, we were trying to say we need some flexibility to kind of help better define the state accountability for an adequate education. And then we want to leave the federal side over here, knowing that we're still using one test, we're still collecting the same data, it's the same kids, but there's obviously, just from discussions with people in this room, the legislature, and just a whole other people around with like lawsuits and whatnot, the accountability for an adequate education is different, and there are different measurements and indicators that we should probably be looking at rather than outside the federal. So that's really what we're trying to do, is we're trying to kind of, so back in 2020, and I think we're really starting, I think 2018, because that's why I had to grab the 2016, 2017 law book. We kind of commingled a lot of that, and we're trying now to kind of pull some of that apart, not all of it, but pull as much of it as apart as possible so we can have these two parallel systems, so we can really ensure that we are complying with both the state's expectations and the federal expectations. So,
Can I,
Representative Tanner?
Thank you. And I guess I want to pursue what I kind of was talking about yesterday, that in 2017, we got rid of PACE, the performance assessment, the national PACE competency-based education. And I'm wondering, did it just totally collapse? I mean, did we not have a way to measure during that time? Did we not have
So-
structure in the State Department? And now we're trying to reconstitute something?
So PACE was never about the accountability for an adequate education. It was competency-based assessments, and it was different assessment methodologies. But it never replaced the task force. It never replaced accountability or anything like that. So PACE was an entirely separate, and it was a pilot. It was determined by the Department of Education in consultation with the U.S. Department of Education that it was something that we could no longer go forward with, mostly because it wasn't something that was scalable. And so the U.S. Department of Education didn't approve continuing waivers for the PACE project because it was a pilot project. It was saying, like, well, let's see if we can change the way that we are assessing kids. And it was something that was that we tried, and we just decided we could no longer continue forward with. But that completely outside of accountability. It was never meant to replace accountability. There was no talk of PACE in accountability.
So let's try to get back right to the side-by-side move through it. The first line in Roman 1 says, in current law, the commissioner shall review the performance-based system. Fine. Then you go across to the other side where it says, there is hereby established a task force to develop and review. Whereas before, if you looked at what I pointed out to at the bottom page 570, the commissioner may establish a task force to assist with this review. It doesn't say develop. So what the department seems to be doing here is handing off the development, which is the responsibility of the department right now, to a task force.
So, and the reason for that is because we tried to do it last year, and it's very clear that the committee specifically in this room was not supportive of the department doing that on its own. And so we said, well, I guess we need a task force or we need somebody else. But we tried to change a lot of that with 266 last year, and we could not go forward with it. There was just a lot of technical concerns that were brought up here, and the department was trying to listen to the concerns discussed in this room. And, you know, the conversation in this room was about, well, what about this thing? What about this thing? All, you know, adding these additional indicators. And we're like, all right, clearly the conversation needs to be much bigger than just Nate Green and I trying to make an accountability system where the math can math. Because that's really what we were trying to do last year. There's so much confusion, and like the terminology is so commingled, and different parts of the law are commingled into here. And it's, as we're trying to implement it, which we've been trying to do essentially for the last 2 years for the very first time, we have really, really struggled with that because the law has just been taken and written over and over again, and different parts left in and different parts removed that we really felt needed to be there. Truly, the RSA 193C, E, and H need to be completely overhauled, completely rewritten. And we need to make sure that we are keeping in mind the accountability for an adequate education, the assessment requirements that are state assessment requirements, and the federal accountability requirements for the Every Student Succeeds Act, and the federal assessment requirements. And these are all kind of these different buckets that are very important, that everybody has a lot of opinions on, that are just getting a little bit messy over times. I mean, we spent an absorbent amount of time talking about the student identifiers last time, which, or the SLDS system, like the whole state system for SASSA numbers, that's randomly commingled in here. It doesn't need to be. Having a SASSA number has nothing to do with an adequate education. It's a very important section of the law that the department uses for a whole myriad of things, but we really need to kind of pull that out. And that being in here confuses everybody. And so when a superintendent or a principal comes to us and says, can you show us exactly how in law we're supposed to be implementing an adequate education? We're like, oh, well, here. And it talks about the minimum standards for an adequate education, but that's not the full minimum standards section that's in the 306s. That's the minimum standards for public school approval. There is so much confusion. That's what we're trying to fix.
Yes, Representative Belcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a question on timing. Do we have time to do a little bit of amending to this, or do we need to act on this immediately?
This bill is not an early bill of the Senate bills. We have several of those, and those have to be out of committee by the 25th of this month. These bills right here have to be out of here around the, well, yeah, I'm going to say the 14th. The 16th is that Wednesday, and we've always been told get it out earlier, so it'd be about the 14th of May. This would have to come out, be acted upon. So going down and following where we are with this in Roman 1 here, there, if you were to look at the section I pointed to in the bottom page, it also says of this task force, the commissioner shall be chair. Who's going to be chair of this task force? It doesn't state in 378.
The task force would appoint a chair.
It doesn't say that.
So we can
It
say that.
So that would have to be an amendment that's done to this so that it maybe the commissioner appoints, or maybe it's the commissioner, or maybe the commissioner opens up and then that body chooses their chair.
The commissioner certainly wouldn't have the capacity to do this level of work. This task force, to really come up with a true accountability system, would need to meet quite a few times for probably several, like for day-long meetings. The commissioner couldn't be a chair, and that's why, because the original task force too from 2016 had the commissioner as being chair, and Nate and I specifically said that's not something the commissioner has the capacity to do. So.
Okay. Are there any, now we were on page 1 of this, side by side. We were looking at Roman 1, and we slipped into starting to look at Roman 2. I wasn't going down through the membership on that particular task force, but I was talking about who chairs it. And I know the previous laws have always said that the commissioner shall chair or designate. Yes, correct. Are there any questions of Caitlin on 1 and 2? Yes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. The question I have, I don't see, unless I'm misreading this, I don't see any teacher as appointed as a potential member of this task force. Is there a reason why a teacher was not? I know you've got other certified personnel in there, but it's, as you went through the litany of options here, I noted that there was not a practicing teacher that was involved in this list here. Was there a reason for that?
I mean, so teacher could certainly fall under the category of educational experts. So you could certainly put a teacher in there, but we kind of felt that through principals and superintendents that they would have the appropriate teaching experience necessary to kind of cover that area too. If the committee felt a teacher should be added, we would be fine with that too.
Thank you.
So.
Are you going to be looking at the integrity, accuracy, the validity of such an instrument, or looking at some of the test and measurement issues, which we certainly would be wanting to look at, reliability, all that, range, variances?
Yeah, so the majority of those kind of questions are really handled on the assessment side of things, and there's assessment. There's called the TAC. It's the
Yeah.
I don't even know what the TAC stands for. I should, but it's essentially an assessment task force that looks at reliability and validity of assessments, and so a lot of that is handled over there on that side of things. There's no reason why this task force couldn't, but this is really about designing what the indicators are that the department is reviewing to determine if a school is providing an adequate education or not.
But you already put
So-
the indicators in there.
So this says some of the ones that we should look at, but these are the ones, most of these are in current law, right? So we said the
It looks like you cherry picked a few.
okay, maybe. But so I think these are some of the indicators that are in current law that we said we should look at, but we should also look at other metrics as determined by the task force. And 2 weeks ago when we sat here, I think some people brought up CTE, somebody else brought something else up. And like, these are exactly what we're saying is clearly there's a lot of people that think there are things that should be part of the measurement that are not currently part of the measurement. And we need to determine that.
Yesterday, we spent, I'm sorry for taking all the time, we looked at instruction, curriculum, and assessment and trying to ensure all three are aligned. And in assessment is really an issue, a topic that somebody just can't come off the street and say, well, this is what we're going to have. There's a lot of mechanics to it, and as we've talked about, dealing with test and measurement stuff, I would hope that anything we're doing, that all these folks have a good understanding of curriculum, a good understanding of instruction, and especially when we're talking accountability, a good understanding of test and measurement.
I agree.
Yeah, okay. Representative Luna?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much, Ms. Davis. So I may have missed this earlier because I stepped in a few minutes after you began to your testimony. But in the current section of E3C, what types of schools does that basically the PBAS, what schools or what organizations does that apply to now?
Public schools.
Public schools.
Sorry. Public district schools. It does not apply to charter schools.
So say that again?
Public district schools. District.
Public school districts.
Yes.
Public school districts. Okay. So would it be fair then to say that since it only applies to public school districts, that the members of the commission, of the task force that are listed out in Roman 2A, B, C, A, B, and C, would also be current employees of a public school district. And I would also add onto that what Representative Myler asked, that perhaps a teacher holding a current certification and currently employed at a public school district, that we put those qualifiers on the members of the task
If the
force.
committee feels like they want to add that, that's fine. I mean, I think the old one, I think might have had a school board member. So, I mean, I think just talking about, we've talked about including some of the associations and things like that. Those people are not employees of school districts. So if the committee wants to limit that, I think that's
but
fine, but.
Right, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
consistent with your statement that PBAS only applies to public school districts. It does not apply to charter schools, doesn't apply to private schools, doesn't apply to EFAs, doesn't apply to
Those are
I
public
don't know,
schools.
CTE.
Those are public
Yeah,
schools.
those are public
That
schools.
would apply.
Yes,
That would apply to
we
CTE.
fund them.
But there are
As
certain,
charters as well.
but there are certain things, no, this doesn't apply to charter.
Well, I understand that. I can show you that where the phraseology is, but I'm also looking at the bottom page 570, where we've had this task force in place before. And I can't understand why, if we're going to have a committee like that, we don't have educational experts on there. Why we wouldn't have a parent on there who's not an employee.
Oh, I only was talking about A, B, and C. I'm not,
Okay.
yeah, where you go to.
Oh, you're only
ed-
talking A, B, and C.
A, B, and
Okay.
C, which talked about people with credentialed people that are serving in that capacity in a public school district.
I would just say a school board member is not probably considered employed.
No, but
for A and B.
serving in a public school. I mean, I wouldn't want a school board member while they're on the school board of a private school. That's,
Oh, okay. So yeah, and by our saying that's really, we meant a public school board member. We didn't need
Yeah,
a.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, but I just want to be real specific.
This is echoing exactly what was in the law before.
And the department.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
What, the,
Have you opened up your
I've got it
book
open right here.
570,
Yeah?
bottom left-hand column, where it says,
Under the
under
notes?
Roman 1, it says 13 members to the task force, which shall consist of, and then you read them all. That's exactly
Right,
what's here.
but that was also, that was, was that 2020?
Yes.
I just think, being very specific about, the credentials that they hold and where they're,
So and the department put the certification in there, basically requiring it. I would, just because of the amount of time this might actually take. I think there's some really quality retired superintendents and principals that are maybe not employed that we would maybe want to cautious on that.
okay, no, and I was sort of, I had that in the back of my mind. I also have in the back of my mind, a teacher that may teach in a private school in another state that also happens to hold a teaching credential in New Hampshire, or something. I'm not sure if how do I say it? That having either being currently employed by a public school or having served as an employee in a public school in these capacities, I think is relevant experience.
I agree with that. Yes, and that's really what the department was trying to get with that, requiring it to be a credential holder, but that I think probably what you're saying gets in the same direction.
Okay, and then
And for the record, this would be a task force that would meet in person at the Department of Education. This is not something somebody that lives in like North Carolina could do. So
yeah, no, but with Zoom these days, things.
yeah, and so the department is actually pretty stringent about its requirements and expectations of these task force members. With our accountability task force, we're very strict about that. We meet in person. We've had a few Zoom meetings, but we're really bringing it back in person. There's a lot of value with these types of conversations when they're had in person.
Well, Chair Ladd and I just served on a task force, and there were some Zoom meetings, on that.
Portsmouth Park too.
And if I may, Mr. Chair, just sort of continuing on where you've got educational experts, parents, guardians, I think there's definitely some good having parents, guardians in there, but where we've got members of a public interest group concerned with education, there's a lot of those in New Hampshire, and I know other legislation that has called for task forces or commissions in other areas, such as environmental resources, things like that, have specifically called out organizations that have shown tremendous commitment to the state of New Hampshire, like the Nature Conservancy. So they don't just say like an environmental interest group. They actually specifically call out, a member appointed by the executive director of TNC. And I'm wondering if maybe that would apply here too, because we have a lot of, very serious groups that come and testify in this committee, such as NEA New Hampshire, AFT New Hampshire, ACLU, Reaching Higher New Hampshire, and that possibly those groups could have experts contribute to this work.
So the department specifically kind of put that catch-all on, so we could have experts. So just kind of a couple reminders, and because this is something that Nate and I went around with, like, really what is the makeup of the task force, and we said, let's try to tie as much to the old one as possible. One, it's the commissioner in consultation with the oversight committee. So I would imagine that we would probably bring a fair number of people as appropriate to the oversight committee and potentially do the appointments. So we put a cap of 15 members, so that, because we can't have a 500 member committee. And then, so 6 of them are automatically going to be made up of superintendents from around the state. 2 of them are going to be principals, and 1 of them is going to be a school board member. So that's 9 right there. So that gives you 6 to kind of work with, and that could be in that catch-all category. We absolutely value the opinion of a lot of the educational experts in the state and or work with them very regularly at the department, but we didn't necessarily want to call out each one individually because one, we'd just accidentally forget somebody, but two, we want to make sure that we don't have a gigantic task force that we want to make sure that's something that we can actually control. And so that's kind of why we're saying we would probably bring a group in consultation and maybe say, all right, this is appropriate. And maybe we say, if all six of them want, if six of them were, all from the Superintendent's Association, we would maybe say, all right, well, we don't want six members of the, not NHA even has six people, but we wouldn't say, maybe we don't want those six people just from that association because you already have six superintendents, or maybe you want to use somebody from some of the other groups. So that's exactly kind of what the discussion the department envisions by, having this task force and having it appointed by the commissioner and in consultation with the governor and this group. So.
A quick follow-up, Mr. Chair, on that. And when you say in consultation with the governor and the oversight committee, what does that mean from a practical standpoint?
So the department consults with committees, I think, on a regular basis. I think it would be, the department really sees it as a conversation and trying to say like, all right, this is who we think is the appropriate group. If you wanted to give it more teeth, we could probably do that too. But I also want to make sure that we actually get a task force appointed and move forward with it. So.
Further questions, Representative McDonald?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this task force, if I'm understanding correctly, was in law for a number of years, but repealed in 2020. Why? Like, there must have been some reason, and is that reason still valid, or has something changed?
So that was really an effort of the Department of Education to kind of, one, there was legislation that removed a lot of old task forces and everything like that. So I don't know if that was originally swept up in that bill. I don't know if somebody could look that up. Jen could. But the department did try to make an effort to consolidate a lot of the accountability work, especially with the work that we were doing around ESSA. And then we kind of took a look at that and said, no, these are really separate systems and we really do need to pull them apart and they do need to have separate accountability. And there's so much that needs to go on with state accountability. And, part of that is the department's continued learning about the systems and the rules and how they interact with each other. And that's partially through changes in laws. That's partially from the work the department has been doing because of the various different funding lawsuits, the various different bills. But so the department was, and I don't remember exact details, but probably involved with the elimination of the original task force. And now we're saying we really need to pull them back apart and look at them separately. And a lot of that too is so the department, when we were trying to consolidate the accountability in 2017 and 18, the department was trying to do that because of a lot of the ESSA work. But now that we have started implementing the ESSA work and because that was before it was ever implemented, but when the department started doing that work, the complexity and kind of the metrics around that were like, well, this is not necessarily defining an adequate education. This is the accountability for the federal accountability system, but the accountability for an adequate education, which is defined in RSA 193E2, is different than what we're looking at in ESSA. And part of that was conversations too. I mean, we've had many conversations in this committee of what are you doing to support the state schools that are not providing an adequate education? The department does not have resources to support those state schools. If you happen to be determined a CSI school under the federal accountability system and also not providing an adequate education through either IBAS or PBAS, and you get lucky enough to be, lucky is maybe not the appropriate term, but you are failing under both systems, you are eligible for a very specific federal grant. But if you are just not providing an adequate education through IBAS alone, and you're not one of those bottom 5% of schools, there's no additional resources the department can provide to any schools right now. And that's a challenge that we've discussed many times because we have, say, you're automatically exempt from federal accountability if you're not a Title I school or have a very, very low graduation rate. But so any non-Title I high school that has a graduation rate above a certain amount is automatically exempt from that. Any elementary school that doesn't receive Title I funds, which in a district, so Title I is rank ordered by poverty, those schools are automatically exempt from federal accountability. But those schools are still, or those towns, municipalities, we as the state of New Hampshire are paying adequate education dollars for those kids. So there should be some accountability for those schools as well.
Representative Cascadden?
Just so I can kind of picture this in my mind, and I envision that public school approval is the following of the 306 rules. Correct me if I'm wrong. And the performance, the accountability that we're talking about is the minimum standards plus the other indicators in that accountability system. And then further, the ESSA accountability plan, it really encompasses all the federal dollars and programs.
Yeah,
Is that
that
fair way to kind of pocket these? This is a big egg.
It is, and actually, it's funny because on the whiteboard in my office, there's these circles, and
Yeah, so it's,
we've talked about specifically that. So we have a couple of different things. We have the accountability for an adequate education, which is IBAS and PBAS. So that's kind of the inner. So there's adequate education funding. There's the accountability for an adequate education, which is RSA 193E2, which is a portion of the minimum standards, but not all of the minimum standards. And so that's something that's confusing. And the department specifically tried to change that terminology last year with this committee. We couldn't get there. And so it's a portion of the minimum standards. And then we have the minimum standards for public school approval, which are a lot more comprehensive than just the ones defined in RSA 193E2, because that's just a small section. And that is everything a public school has to do to be approved. And then another bubble over here with a little bit of overlap, because it's the same kids, the same assessments, the same, indicators and metrics, you have ESSA. So there's some overlap, but nowhere does ESSA say that, you have to look at the minimum standards set forth in 30642 or whatever.
follow up?
Yes.
So then now taking those pots, I guess, for lack of a better word, we're focused on the performance-based accountability plan.
Correct.
Right? So is there still in place the mechanisms for schools to submit their action plans? Is there corrective action? Are they still labeled CSI and TSI? I mean, is there technical assistance for it? Does that part of the plan still exist?
All under the federal? Absolutely. That just stays there.
Okay.
I'm not sure, and I think this is one of the things that's confusing, and I think we should probably use better terminology or different terminology, is, I guess right now under the law, we have state CSI schools and we have federal CSI schools. We should, I think there should be a different terminology if they're going to have different measurements. And I think one of the bills use the word state underperforming schools. And so maybe we switch to that. And then so we have the whole federal system over here. We have the whole state system over here. And so we can actually then have the corrective action plans, all of that work, the technical assistance under the state side of things, separate from the federal side of things.
We've been trying to work towards this for years. There was always the issue of our high schools. Many of the high schools never received a Title I dollar. They were received maybe within that district for a grade school. So then you had one maybe high school or two high schools that are on that report needing support. And they were saying, wow, we have two really, failing high schools in the state. That was not necessarily the case. We only had two that were receiving Title I monies that were perceived by the state as being low. There were others. And so then we went to the direction, maybe this accountability system needs to measure all high schools or all schools in the state, which it should. And that's, I think, the struggle that we're after right now.
And that's a great example. I mean, that right there is, I mean, it's one of many issues that we have, but that is a very describable and it's understandable example.
Yeah. So look, going down through this, we're still not, Roman 2 there, and sliding towards the other ones, Roman 3, but are there any more, questions about Roman 1 or 2? I would like to move on here. Yes, Representative Damon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have a question going back to Representative Luno's topic on the members of a public interest group. So is there a definition of what a public interest group is? Because I have reservations about how open-ended that sounds.
So
Like, can an individual form a public interest group that wants to advocate for some particular aspect of education and invite themselves to be part of this?
So I would also think that the commissioner, the governor, and the task force would use prudence when appointing people to this commission. And so understanding everybody's backgrounds and expertise and how they're going to be able to dedicate their time and resources to this task force are all things that the department and the group of people doing the appointing will understand. I think anybody's able to apply to be part of this task force, but we, the legislature, the department, need to make sure that they're appointing the best available people.
Just yesterday, we had the Professional Standards Board we were talking about, and we were talking about how Career Technical Education wanted to have some folks from the business community on there, seeing that they want to have some impact as far as what that outcome's going to be. I don't see, the business community used to be in the old legislation for this task force right here, but they're not, but they would come underneath those other interested groups. They're not, an association. It could be just somebody coming out of, one of our manufacturing plants here that has a real strong interest in seeing that we want kids coming out with these skills. And how are you going to measure those skills? By test, or are you going to measure it by application of the skill?
I'll pause.
Yeah. Yes, Representative Tanner.
I mean, and I just want to Representative Damon's point, I mean, if you want to change that terminology, we're perfectly happy with that. We wanted to make sure that we felt we had the flexibility if we had a really high quality group that came forward to the department that wanted to participate on it, that we didn't limit that. And we obviously cannot list every public interest group that exists in this state, or we have legislation as long as this book, so.
Yeah. Representative Tanner?
Thank you. I think somebody from representing special education should be on that committee because of the real specific way that they're going to be dealing with assessment. I also feel that we should have some of the people appointed by different groups, for example, the School Boards Association, and then approved by the task force and the commissioner. I want to get away from political appointments as much as possible on this if we're really going to do it. And lastly, I totally agree with you that you need at least one or two experts on testing to be on that committee.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of groups out there. For example, we used to have a man that was sitting here all the time years ago. His name was Mark Joyce. And Mark, he'd be a super person on a group like this. Dr. Joyce and his family were all educators from Niagara Falls area, but he came to this state and he was outstanding. And he oftentimes wrote our statutes for us.
I worked with Mark for many years myself, and I agree, and that's partially why we wanted other educational experts, because somebody like Mark is not working in a public school. He's not working for NHSA right now, but we could certainly, he's probably very happy in Florida and not,
I think he is.
not wanting to be sitting in this room because he did that for many years. But people like that, that's exactly why we left it open-ended. So.
Yeah, he and I were born in the same hospital within the same year at Niagara Falls County Hospital.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah, it's a crazy world. Representative Myler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question on item E in the list here. It says the department shall advise, facilitate, and support the task force. Is this position a non-voting member or just merely an advising member? Because I would assume that members of the task force are going to have to take some perhaps some votes on issues, et cetera. And so the question I have is whether or not the intent in E is for them to be a voting member or merely an advise and technical support.
Merely advise and technical support.
Okay, so that, I think that's an issue then should be clarified.
We should put
because-
in parentheses, technical support or
Right.
advising,
Yeah,
like we
because,
do with Jeff Beards or what we do with Steve
Exactly.
Appleby.
right, exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you for the clarification.
Good point. Let's go on to item Roman 3 on the task force side, because it's Roman 2 on the other side. Task force shall have these following duties. Any issues with that? Identify performance criteria and measurements, et cetera? Yes.
So I think you'd mentioned this earlier. What about the organizational aspects of the task force? As being one of the first duties that they,
Well, I think that's what we have to identify, who's going to be the chair
Yeah.
and how do you, I thought we had that documented as something we have to amend.
yeah, so calling the, who's gonna call the first meeting?
Call it.
Then the first act is to elect a chair.
Yeah. Unless it's the first named person as the chair or what, you know.
It could be, yeah, I mean, pick whatever, yeah.
That whole thing
yeah.
we've got to resolve, that can be done, I think, easily.
Yeah, but I think that needs to be in the, even though it wasn't in the 2020
Yeah.
statute, I think that's important. Also that meetings will be conducted in public, duly noticed, whether there's gonna be public comment period, in those meetings. You know, so the organizational structure is important. And then something that came up on our school funding commission,
Yeah.
although the pandemic, it got swept away by the pandemic,
Yeah.
was whether non-legislative members, I know it's, and there aren't legislative members on that, would receive mileage, particularly if they're coming from, you know, parts of the state that are 100 miles away.
I noticed the legislative members were not on this right here.
There are no legislative.
So we
That's right, they
specifically-
were before.
So
but
they were,
Who wants
but
to be on that?
no, so they were before, but the reason we put that out is because we wanted to bring it to the oversight committee. And so we really were kind of putting everything back on the power of the oversight committee. And we're like, because the oversight committee has the ultimate kind of like, where this group is bringing the results of that. And that's why we took them off.
Yeah, so I think that's a reasonable way to engage the legislative members on this. But even without even if there's no legislative members on here, I think providing some mileage consideration or
I
something
mean, I
like
think
that would need to be in
realistically,
statute.
this is my personal opinion. Realistically, mileage and potentially stipends would be really helpful, but the department didn't want to put something that has a fiscal note forward, honestly, because we wanted to get done. We're expecting these people to be educational experts, to take time, their probably personal time
Yeah.
to do this work. It would be great if we could pay a nominal stipend to show people we at least appreciate their time and appreciate and efforts towards this. So, but I don't know that that's not something the department ever does, and so I just want to kind of put that out there.
It didn't go to mileage.
But
Well, we know the department has deep pockets, so.
oh yeah, very deep.
The commissioner in the old law or designee shall be the chairman. That was in law. So we want to really work that out, who's going to be the chair. Let's move on down to this area 3 here, the task force and the following duties. Any issues there, so we can march on down further? How about Roman 4? The task force shall develop a performance-based scoring system.
So we actually
And just let me read
Oh,
the,
yes.
the current law and Senate Bill 378 discuss how the PBAS shall be based on data and indicators. Current law references data and indicators. The indicators that you're referencing are on page 564, the delivery of an adequate education. That's where I think you've probably lifted number of these indicators and put in here. I noticed if you can look on 564 and 565, you can see those indicators, and a number of those indicators sort of have been integrated in Can you speak to that first?
Yeah, well, so one thing I guess I just want to point out, because Representative Belcher brought this up last time, and we were talking about using only the best available accountability system. That is actually a typo. We went back and we looked at the original legislation that Nate and I had typed up, and it was, it had just gotten messed up in the track changes. So that, I know you had lots of questions about it, and we were kind of confused about it too. What it meant, it literally is a typo. So using only the best available accountability system can be struck out. So it would say the task force shall develop a performance-based accountability system using only the best available data indicators which are already available and provided to the department. So that's what the existing law says. That's what the old law says. There was a typo, and that's why we couldn't figure out what it was supposed to mean. So the majority of it is from the existing law / the old plan. The existing law, for some reason, lists out all of the college and career readiness indicators like they're all separate things, but it's actually one measurement. So the college and career readiness indicator is a current indicator in the existing plan, and then there is 11, I believe, 11 or 12 subcategories of it, which are enumerated in current law, but it's not very clear from the current law that they are actually subcategories of the college and career readiness indicators. And so that's why we grouped them all into the college and career readiness indicators as defined by the ESSA plan.
Yes, Representative Tanner.
I don't notice that growth is in this, and I think growth was in the ESSA plan and also I think it's very key. And I'm not quite sure how you would put it in, but I know with competency-based education, sometimes people take the competency several times, or whether there's a growth over that period of time. And that to me seems to be one of the things that should be an indicator.
And that's mostly encompassed by performance on the state assessment, because we usually typically measure growth and performance. Growth and achievement under performance. But if we needed to further enumerate that, we could.
I think that opens up another door here. Are we talking about a competency-based assessment, or are we talking about a performance-based assessment?
We're talking about the state assessment defined under RSA 193C.
So which is it?
It's a competency. It's neither of those. It's just the state assessment. It's not. It's not a performance basis. It's
So, Mr. Chair, just in this whole area where, looking at the potential, indicators and how to, develop a PBAS based on what information, is there a reason why the task force would be limited only to data that's currently being collected by the department? Or could the task force suggest, as we've done in House Bill 1586, which is an interim study, as well as in House Bill 1680 from a couple of years ago, other indicators that the department's currently not collecting that could be used to help measure the outcomes of a school district?
So we use that terminology because that's what's in existing law. If the committee wanted to expand that, I think you certainly could. We just need to make sure that we have a way of collecting it, and that it's. I think we just need to be careful how much we're expanding on the data.
No, that's fine. But I mean, giving the task force a little bit of leeway to maybe suggest an indicator that the task force feels has value that currently is not being collected. I mean, one that we talked about on the higher ed task force was the information about the number of students that graduate from high school and matriculate to a 2 or 4 year or post-secondary, and how it's being collected now versus how it could be, collected. And I think you were very interested in that,
Yeah. So that's existing law, and I think so.
Right.
Certainly, feel free to change it, but we didn't want to expand much more than
Right.
what
So,
we
I mean, this was really a sort of a copy from existing
Yes,
law.
yeah. I mean, we already do have the other metrics, and so I think that if there was another metric that you guys determined, and you could certainly, just a reminder, this will ultimately result in something that would need to be written in law.
Right.
And so
Right.
you could certainly strike that out, or say the department will collect X, Y, and Z from schools. But this task force is going to hopefully come up with something that will be a new RSA 193
Right.
whatever C.
Yeah, and I hope the task force would have the flexibility to be able to look at maybe more, additional indicators that maybe were difficult or impossible to collect 10 years ago, but now can be collected either by the department directly from the districts or by the department through a third party, like what was the one that we were?
Clearinghouse.
The clearinghouse, exactly. So thanks.
Representative Cascadden, then Representative Myler.
Okay, just to try to move on from part 4, but looking at part 4, you just said something about a typo, so I'm still thinking part 4 is going to replace part 3. And maybe that first sentence is changed to the task force shall develop, I don't know, maybe you're crossing out scoring system. But I don't know that there's a need to list all of those if you just reference A to O, the 15 indicators in the law. And it sounds like you want to add, or we want to add that last piece that's recommended, other metrics as determined by the task force. So we're maintaining A to O that's in current law and adding other metrics as determined by the task force. So it leaves it open-ended, should there be something else. But it's listed here as if it's new, but it really isn't.
That's
Right?
true.
Okay.
The issue with it being enumerated in current law right now is if there are changes to the ESSA plan, they're not incorporated in current law. And we do feel like those college and career readiness indicators really need to be, like, we think that is an important indicator in the ESSA plan that should be looked at. And so that's it's challenging if we have a list right here and then a list over here that
Right.
don't equal. And so that's why we're saying
Okay.
get rid of the individuals that are enumerated and then just refer back to the ESSA plan for the college and career, because college and career readiness indicators are a requirement of the ESSA plan.
But they're not listed in this plan.
They're not, so it's just under C. So it says college and career readiness indicators aligned to the New Hampshire Consolidated State Plan.
Okay, so you just use C
Right,
in
instead
addition to A to O,
yeah, because in the
Okay.
existing law, yeah, that's
right? So we're adding 2 more to the original list in the law, right? To point out the college and career readiness indicators, because those are a separate list, and they're also in the federal plan. And
Well,
we're,
yeah. So we're in the current law. We're kind of crossing out D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L. Yeah, those ones we're crossing out
in the current law.
in the current law.
Can you repeat that, please?
So in the current law, it is D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L. Those are the some of, but not all of the ESSA, the college and career readiness indicators in the ESSA plan.
What
Okay,
about
so what
M,
you're saying.
M through O?
So those are not indicators of the ESSA plan, though. Those are not college and career readiness indicators.
But see, you have it as G here and M there are the same thing.
G here.
So is
Yes, right. So we're continuing to include that, but so we're leaving G. Yes, we're leaving G. That's why we're just the middle ones are essentially getting consolidated up
Okay,
to the college
get
and
it.
career readiness indicators.
So we're consolidating D to L because they're all college and career readiness indicators, correct?
Correct.
And they're in the federal plan.
Correct.
Okay, so then we still need M, N, and O, although that would be reclassified because you're compressing a whole bunch. And you're adding other metrics as determined by the task force.
Well, I think, the department really wanted to have a conversation too, to say so are those things truly a measure of an adequate education? Is teacher administrative turnover rates actually an indicator of if you're providing an adequate education? Or is that something that you should be looking at relative to the overall performance of an education system, which are different? Same with the FAFSA completion.
Okay. So would that be something the task force would continue to discuss?
Absolutely, the other
Yeah.
metrics as determined by the task
See,
force.
Because we could be splitting hairs.
I think we're splitting hairs, but I'm
all
also
day.
real concerned where you are. I'm concerned, I'm sure Representative Cornell is saying, what about F?
We're right.
What about the career technical education certification and outcomes there, which we're trying to grow that program? We know we have to. We should be tracking it.
F is encompassed in the college and career readiness indicators, though, in the ESSA plan. We're not getting rid of it. It's
I
one
like
of those,
it when
right?
it's spelt right out.
So-
Career technical education.
Okay. Well, career and technical education. So do we want to talk about, maybe we need another category that specifically talks about career and technical education and participation in career and technical education. So is it participation? Is it, what is that? I think maybe that's a whole different category. But then also though, my question is that a measurement if somebody is receiving an adequate education?
Well, I would think so. The achievement scores the kids coming out of CTEs are higher than they are coming out of high schools.
But we're already looking at achievement scores for a measurement of adequate education.
Yeah.
Okay. So CTE is extremely important, but again, we have to think those centers are not in every single high school. So they're regional centers, as you know, and I think college and career indicators would cover some work or achievement within a career and technical ed center. But if you're looking at a real small high school, okay, let's take Pittsburgh, has 8 kids probably in that senior class, and out of those 8 kids, maybe half of them are going to college and half are not, and none of them are interested in going over to Canaan
They're going
CTE
across the
program
river,
or to
that's right.
Colebrook.
Yeah.
So now you have no kids in a particular high school participating in a CTE program just by design. That could happen, I don't know, any small high school that has to travel to a center. And I worry that if we put CTE in as one of the criteria,
So, Mr.
it
Chair,
should be under college and career readiness anyways, what
Well,
I'm
you could
saying.
put such as, but not limited to, career
Right.
technical education.
Right.
But I think it's also spelling out that we have a weakness in our CTE program in this state, a definite weakness. And when we have approximately 20% of the kids not attending because they're an ascending school,
Correct.
and the 80% are in those schools which have it internally.
And some high schools require that all students take a CTE course for graduation requirement. And some schools with a CTE center don't require credit
Yeah.
for graduation.
Right.
So,
so
I mean, that's another.
isn't this
ball of
more
wax,
task force conversation though? Task
is.
force
I think it
discussion?
is.
Let's stick to
but
9,
Yeah.
let's just
Yeah.
vote that they'll have a task
If
force.
this is all task
Let's just do
force issue, then you should say reference this statutory language, 193E3.
Right, just reference
Roman 1, as
193
it was stated
code.
by Representative Cascadden.
Except having some flexibility
This is
to
all
to
done.
consider new indicators that currently aren't being collected by the department. And that would also be task force discussion that oh, that indicator doesn't make sense, that indicator does
So
make
you
sense.
keep H there in and put,
I think-
reference the current statute.
I think
Go
you could
pick
do
and
that.
choose.
As long as there's flexibility to have a conversation in the task force with members of the department to consider other factors. And the department could come back and say, yeah, we can collect that, or we can find that information, or there's no way we'll ever get that information. That's impossible to collect. And then that's all task force consideration.
Okay, are we good with Roman
Keep
4?
moving.
Representative
Yeah.
Myler?
Mine is more of a high level question, I guess. And that is, you've got these 8 indicators. And you say a performance-based scoring system. How does that work?
So performance-based is basically you're looking at, that's what we have right now. It's the performance-based accountability system. That's the actual name. And so you're looking at how the school's performance on the various different indicators are, or how the schools are performing on the various different indicators, and then doing some sort of rank ordering or some sort of that's exactly what we need to figure out. Like, how are you doing that measurement? And then how are you determining if schools are performing as they're supposed to be doing to provide, like, is the performance of the school indicating that the school is providing an adequate education, as opposed to the other side of it, which is inputs. It's like, so these are things that the state has said you're supposed to do. Yes, you're doing all of these things through IBAS. Like, you are offering, reading, math, blah, 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 all of the courses. And then, but for some reason, the kids are not performing through the other metrics. And so how the two systems work together. So one is looking at what are you providing, and then the other side is how are you actually doing. And so the assessment is the majority of the measurement of that, but it's also potentially the participation in the career and tech education indicators. It's the attendance rate. So if a school, say, had attendance rates of 20%, is that school providing an adequate education? That's exactly what we need to do. We need to look at these different indicators and say, what is an indicator of a school providing an adequate education? And then setting ranges too, like what is the appropriate range? So is it 20% attendance rate? Is it 80% attendance rate? Or do we care if the school has 0% attendance rate, but for some reason 95% of their kids are proficient on the assessment? So it's looking at those different indicators and measurements and working through exactly that.
So I'm gonna try to get this down to real basic here. So let's take attendance rate. Is there a 1 to 5, just as an example? I'm looking for what the metrics is that you're looking at. So on that one category, let's say attendance.
Yep.
1 to 5, 5 being terrific, 1 being 4. If somebody comes in at 20% of attendance rate, do they get a rank of 1 that goes into some kind of a calculation?
So right now, yes. I mean, that's exactly how the federal accountability system works. Attendance rate isn't it, but we look at how they're performing, and we say different performance. This equals a 1, that equals a 2, that equals a 3, and and then we rank all of the schools against each other, and we look at the different levels, and so that's something that we need to determine for this, exactly like which ones of these and where they should be measured, and we need to set what the appropriate level is for each one of these indicators. And that's what the department does. That's what the accountability team does.
So once you have the metrics identified and you go through each school and you look at the indicators, then does the school get kind of a total score?
Yes.
And then they can go back and say, okay, here's what determined that total score.
Yes.
And you can see where we're doing well, where we need to improve, et cetera.
Yes.
So that's what the system does. Then.
Yes. That's what our existing
The
system does
fallacy,
too.
though, to that whole system is we're letting the federal government wag the dog. And that's where I've had this issue with graduation, the 69%
Right.
level. Are we going to go by that level, or are we going to go by a 90% that we are?
Right.
We're letting that 69% wag us. And that to me that's always been the issue, that we are a state that prides ourselves in being better than the rest of the states. But we're holding ourselves to the bar established by those lower states.
Right. And that's the issue with having the two systems tied together, and the graduation rate is a great example.
Yeah. So how do we get around that? Because I'm still oppositional to this 69%, even though we said, okay, do it.
No, we get around it by saying graduation rates, and the task force says any school that has a graduation rate of less than 80% is not providing an adequate education. Bam. I mean, that's what we do, and that's exactly why we need state accountability versus federal accountability. And I'm not saying that 80% is the right. I'm just sort of random number.
I know.
So I just want to say that that's not what the department's advocating for. But that's exactly why we need a state accountability system, because we're saying like what we're trying to measure is if a school is providing an adequate education, which is very different than what
And does
that's
the
measured.
federal government recognize kids that graduate in 5 years instead of 4 years?
No, the federal
They
government
don't.
doesn't. And so, that's also when we're talking about kids that get a high set, that's not recognized in the federal graduation rate. And maybe we want to have those conversations. Maybe we want to have a state defined graduation rate, as we say, 4 or 5 years. And maybe we want to say we also want to do other college completion. So we want to do a GED or a high set and include that. That very well might be part of what the conversation is. And these are great questions for the task force. So.
Representative Damon?
Thank you. So I'm still in that section 4, and the statute on page 64 with the list of indicators says shall include. The proposed task force language says may include the indicators. If we think they're all important, why would they be optional?
So the shall include right now is currently aligned to the
I
federal law.
understand that.
This section of current law is not going away until this task force hopefully comes up with a new indicator list, and probably will say shall, and then bring it forward and we rewrite the current law. But we're saying, hey, task force, look at least these things. Like, you need to look at these things. I mean, if you want to change it to a may, you certainly could, but
No, it says may already.
I mean, sorry, a shall, you certainly could, but we're trying to say, task force, this is what we want you to do. This is what you want you to look at. Look at least these things. So
So I think it should say shall. Thank you for your answer.
Yes, Representative Tanner.
So are there going to be like hybrid schools, some that do competency-based? Or is this for everybody now? So everybody's going to one system?
everybody already is on one system. The definition of adequate education is law and what schools are supposed to be providing. And it doesn't matter if they're hybrid or whatever. This is all public district schools are supposed to be providing adequate education as defined by RSA 193E. And then we, the Department of Education, are supposed to measure through the input-based and the performance-based accountability system whether those schools are actually, in fact, providing an adequate education.
But that's what I mean, you have two measurements, performance-based and.
Correct.
So does a school get rated on one or the other, or are they
Both.
rated on both?
Both. That's what the
Both.
law requires. And this is not changing that at all.
We changed that.
Okay.
It's not, for example, input-based, you could have accreditation, and that would satisfy your inputs.
Input, yeah.
But we wanted performance too, so we said both. I think we did that a couple years back. Did you
Okay.
do that
Yeah, I think
again?
2020.
So along those same lines, though, when looking at indicators to that feed into the PBAS and whether a school district or school is providing an adequate education, does the department currently collect, for lack of a better term, other mitigating factors that might contribute to the performance of
No.
student outcomes?
No.
Whether, for example, one that might contribute to low attendance might be, a high number of students with fragile medical conditions or something like that. Or one that might contribute to other, lower performance might be, high percentage of free and reduced price lunch or families that live in poverty.
Well, we certainly, I guess it depends on what you want to, as you said, I said no too quickly. So we have a number of kids that are free and reduced. We have a number of kids that English language learners that are special education. We have kids that are participating in CTE programs. We have expulsion and suspension rates. We have attendance rates. So some of those could certainly be
Right.
used. But to your point before, there might be other ones that the department's not collecting that we may or may not have the ability to collect.
And in the current PBAS, are those mitigating factors considered in the accountability formula,
So
I guess?
in the current PBAS system, which is aligned to the federal system, we look at the performance of subgroups. And so we do look at performance of English language learners compared to the total population or English or special education towards that. And that is one of the things that could categorize you as an ATS or a CSI school. CSI is the performance of the whole
Right.
school. ATS is the performance of a certain subgroup.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay, let's get on to the next Roman, because we have, a real important one's coming up. And that's,
Close to this one.
this is the one I think that's going to generate all the concern and questioning, beyond where we've been. So we're looking at this. I'm looking at Roman 5 on, looking at Roman 4 on our side, the current law, verse 5 on that law. And I guess the question we're going to have is, on the Roman 4 side, where current law, after the report is approved by the Legislative Oversight Committee, that approval is taken away from legislative oversight now. There's no approval given now in this new process. Recommendation, things come for consultation, but there's no approval.
So goes back to my point before. The department would need a new law written. So the plan would come to the legislature to actually write a new so I think so. And I just noticed something, and it was not supposed to be, and I gotta make sure it was not supposed to be repeal and replace. I need to see E3C.
How did 266 get through them?
So, so following duties, blah, 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 blah. So this does not repeal and replace the existing accountability system. The existing accountability system is B and it's still there in law. And the department would still continue to operate the existing accountability system until we had a new accountability system. So this group would bring forward a plan to you all and you say that's a great plan or that's a terrible plan, and somebody on this probably table has to sponsor a new law that would replace RSA 193E3B, which would then talk about the entire accountability system. So the department doesn't just have doesn't have the authority to go implement its own accountability system. It's in law. And so that's why the oversight committee we thought was the appropriate place to say, all right, we as the oversight committee will develop a bill, or we won't develop a bill and continue
Caitlin,
the
what
existing
this reminds me, it's just like the fox overlooking the hen house.
law. Okay. Who's the fox? That oversight committee, the department? Or
Yeah, well, where you're basically taking, when this report's submitted, all approval away from the Legislative Oversight Committee. And you don't have, it's basically now going to be submitted to this Board of Education, the Oversight Committee, yes, but the findings and recommendations is not saying what they're supposed to do. Are they supposed to approve this? Is the board going to approve it? They can't approve it until it becomes law.
no, and the board can't do anything about it. I mean, the board doesn't
And the
have,
legislature's not going to approve something until it's gone through legislative oversight.
right, it's got to go through the law. Yeah, I guess I'm confused because, I mean, the department doesn't have the ability to do anything without a law. This has to result in a law
Yeah.
that would change the performance about, or we just keep the existing accountability system, which we would continue to run until there's a new law.
So if the report comes back for approval, recommendations, and then approval from the oversight committee, it's going to make it a lot easier for a committee like this to sit down and not have to wade through what we're doing right now all over again when it's been done through the oversight committee. And that's the purpose of that committee.
So, right, and I think that's what the department is, that the report shall be submitted to the oversight committee. That's, I think, what the department was trying to do. That's why we would submit it to the oversight committee. So I guess I'm confused. Are you saying that that
Well,
is not enough, or?
This is gets submitted to the Board of Education and the Oversight Committee, and it should say it gets submitted to the Oversight Committee before it goes to the State Board of Education.
Absolutely.
It's just an informational
Oh,
item to the state board, though.
because the 306s should have gone to an oversight, the Legislative Committee, before it went to the State Board of
Well, see,
Education.
that's
Well,
a
that's-
little
but
bit
that's
different
for
though,
rulemaking.
because
That's-
that's not,
I-
that's a mandate for the state board.
Yeah.
Minimum standards. We don't have that authority yet.
And I want to say that's rulemaking. This
We
is
can
not
do it.
rulemaking.
We can
This would
take
need a
it.
law. So I guess I'm confused because I think this is saying that it's going to go to the oversight committee. So are you saying this doesn't say that clear enough, or I mean, I certainly you can amend it however you want, but to me this says it's going to go to the oversight committee. No, it doesn't say prior to. It just says.
But the task force can't create the PBAS would have to be in. I think what I heard you say though, Caitlin, is that the recommendations for the task force, if they were to take effect, would have to be put into statute first.
Exactly.
So it would have to pass through, assuming
Somebody.
this committee or
This committee, the
some
president of the
committee
Senate,
that
yes.
is
Yes.
responsible for education.
Yes. And
Yeah.
so maybe do we need to add another sentence that somebody will write a law about it, or I don't know.
Yeah, something in between 5 and 6, Roman 5 and 6.
Yes, because in 6, it's advising, but there's no approval coming. The Legislative Oversight Committee is almost like an afterthought here.
And that I'm certainly like willing to have you change it however you want. So it's this right now saying the department is supposed to implement PBAS, and that's what it's saying. The department's supposed to implement PBAS as defined by RSA 193E2. So right now, this bill right here does not touch RSA 193E2. So until RSA 193E2 is changed, the department will continue to implement the existing PBAS system. And then when the report is prepared, if then you guys want to write a new RSA 193E2, the department will implement that too.
Representative Cardelli?
But this isn't saying the department will implement whatever the that's certainly not what this is saying, because the task force cannot write a law.
Right. And also in terms of approval, what happens if the Legislative Oversight Committee does not, quote unquote, approve what the task force comes up with? I think instead, what we're saying is that the Legislative Oversight Committee shall recommend, put forward recommendations for future legislation after review of the task force findings.
If you think that makes it more clear too, I'm perfectly fine with that. I mean, I think that'd be helpful if we told the task force to actually do something with it. Cause you're right. I mean, the task force could do nothing with it. And then the department goes around and begs and, each one of you guys to put in a bill for us like we've done with this and some of the other proposals. But yeah, I mean, the ultimate goal is to get something in law that the department can implement. That's really what we're trying to do here. So. Right.
You're starting to take the department out of it and you're putting it in the hands of the task force. Now I see the Legislative Oversight Committee sort of being put to the side too. And then, yes, you're going to advise the legislature later, we need legislation. I think that there should be more contact with the Oversight Committee with specific terminology saying, you shall recommend and, or get some kind of recommendation out of the Oversight Committee on this before we go any farther.
I'm fine with that. I mean, I didn't think we needed to tell the committee to act, but I think that's perfectly fine. That works out better for the department.
Okay. Representative Tanner?
Maybe that was one of the purposes of having a legislator on the task force, is that legislator could be from the Oversight Committee, so that as the whole thing is developing, the task force has input, or the Oversight Committee has input.
I can go either way on that, but I know that the working group we put together just the other day when we're talking about capital improvements for CTEs doesn't have any legislators on it. I think we can get what we want to have on there. How many people here have a strong background in test and measurement? You can go through the statistics and all that and the bell curve and all that. Representative Cascadden probably has some. But as an administrator, that was not necessarily my bailiwick. It's so we need people on there that are going to have some understanding of what we want to come out with, and something that has some merit and can be measurable. And as we've said before in legislation, something that's objective.
Just as a follow-up, what I'm saying is that instead of having the task force meet over here and then all of a sudden put their report on the Legislative Oversight Committee, if you had they don't even have to be voting, but a representative from the Legislative Oversight Committee that meets with the task force, that sees what's happening, that can put some input back and forth, whether legislation would be practical or doable or enforceable or however you want to do it. I just think my whole thought was just that they're in on the process.
I don't have any feeling one way or the other on this, seeing that I feel that this is really an executive body responsibility, but what they want to put in the law is our responsibility. We should have the oversight of what is designed. So I think that when we try to get down into the weeds sometimes, we get ourselves so spread so thin for $100 a year.
So the department can certainly take on this work, right? So we tried with 266 and we tried to do it under advisement with a group of superintendents. We had a group of superintendents come to the department and work with us on that legislation. But we just couldn't get there with that bill because there were so many questions that came up, and the questions were like, well, shouldn't you be considering this and that and the other indicators? And so when we were trying to put forward what we felt were truly technical fixes with the existing law, that's when we got derailed with the conversations of, why are you not concluding CTE? Why is the graduation 67%? And those were the things that were in the existing law. And so Nate and I took that into advisement and we said, all right, we need to add technical corrections and fixes to the existing law so we can implement it and do our jobs that we're supposed to be doing. But then, two, clearly the legislature has additional concerns with the performance-based accountability system, which were addressed in this room, And so we really need to do a deeper dive into that. And that's why we thought a task force was the best thing to do. I mean, to be perfectly honest, I'm a little frustrated with this because the department really did try. Nate and I are sitting in our offices in the basement, come over and see us in the basement, and we're trying to put together the accountability system and make it work, and trying to teach the schools on what they have to be submitting and why they have to be submitting it, and then trying to explain to schools, well, if we determine you as a CSI school for the state accountability purposes, it doesn't matter how well you're doing, you're just in the bottom 5%, and that's that. And there's also no ties into an adequate education. And also, if you're not a Title I school, there's nothing we can do to help you. And these are the challenges that we're trying to do. And then also trying to like read through this law in order and try to say, all right, here's step 1, here's step 2, but step 1 is on this page, step 2 is 30 pages here, step 7 is back at the beginning of the book. These are challenges that we're doing. And so that's what we tried to do the first time. We got very derailed and we're saying, all right, well, maybe we overstepped our skis on this one, and we are trying to pull it back and say the legislature wanted us to really talk about this in a to really talk about the entire system, and that's why we said, like, let's at least try to do a task force then, and let's revisit the entire system rather than just the technical fixes and corrections. And to be honest, when we brought that group of superintendents in, they sat with us and they're like, some of them said, hey, let's look at CTE, let's look at that. And I said, put that in your parking lot. Those are great ideas, but what we're trying to do is technical corrections and fixes to that law. So let's get it through the technical corrections fixed and then improve it. And that's what we had planned. So with 266, our plan was, let's do the technical corrections and then let's expand the system. So we scrapped all of that and are back to this idea. So if you have a better idea, if you have a better idea, please tell us, because we're trying to do what is in this very large book, and we're really stumbling through it, and we need help. Is really what we're
Caitlin,
saying.
we share your frustration.
Yeah.
When we're dealing with 193C, E, and H,
Right.
and it's convoluted, it's a mess, and it's disjointed. I think what you got is a framework here which can work. I think there's a few areas we've mentioned where tweaks to it could occur. But in looking at how we're going to move forward, we got to have a plan to doing that. And what you've offered us is the only solid plan. And I get frustrated with our own legislature. We're having a pretty good discussion here. I don't know what happened on the other side of that wall.
This is a great discussion. I mean, and I wish we actually had time for some of these more detailed discussions, because it would be like a lot of these sections of law we would really like to clean up. And I don't know if maybe it's a better of a summer discussion or something like that too, like where we can really get into some of these weeds. But
Well, then you'd
It's
have to
tough.
probably rediscuss it with a
Yeah.
new committee and a different biennium. Representative Cascadden.
So the bottom line is, that's why they say, don't give anything to the politicians because they get nothing done. I think that we should support getting a task force and letting them do their work. We're going to have the oversight anyway, but they need to have the leverage of that task force to be able to get into the nuts and bolts of this, to start aligning things, because at the same time, they can't put everything on hold in the districts, because the districts are still going to be all accountable for all this stuff. But I think we need to move off the tables. Okay, they need a task force, get it organized, and let the task force do their work. And then let's get something done. Sorry, I'm a
We can
checklist
tweak
per-
this a little
I'm
bit and do
I'm a
exactly what
checklist
you're
person.
saying.
Just drives me
I
crazy.
think we're recognizing something has to be done, and this is a process which should work with a few, who's going to be chair, we can do that stuff, get it in there. But I concur with you. We need to do something here because it's not working the way it is right now.
And I think part of that's not working is there was an original task force, and for some reason, probably part of that, we took it out of law and we're saying, oh no, that really was important and there was a need for that. So, I mean, it'd be easier without a task force, but then you're letting Nate and I make all the decisions, which is scary. But because the task force is going to take a lot of time and resources of the department, but we also feel like by doing the task force, that will get it done right and correctly, and that will allow the stakeholders to be engaged and involved and whatnot. So,
Yeah. Are there further questions from the committee? Yes, Representative Dry.
Is there an end date for this task force?
Yeah.
Yes.
September 25.
Yeah. And that's gonna be a hard to get
Well,
done. That's gonna be hard, but it needs to get done.
Pretty soon.
Okay, follow up.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just looking at, the report shall be submitted annually, this is on page 5 of the draft there, by July 1st, to the task force, the Board of Ed, and the Oversight Committee. So that seems to me to be in perpetuity.
So that's annually, that's the results of the performance, so that's basically who performed what on the performance-based accountability system.
Okay, but it's going to the task force. Doesn't the task force dissolve eventually?
We don't envision the task force dissolving. Our federal task force that we have right now doesn't dissolve. We have a group of superintendents mostly that review it. We meet, I think, 4 times a year, and they advise us. And we try to meet before assessment season, after assessment season, and in the summer, and then just once in the fall, just to kind of get everybody's minds around everything. And that we're continuously looking at the federal ESSA plan. We're looking at, schools' ability to perform. Like one of the things that we looked at, I guess I was going to say recently, but not maybe 2 years ago at this point, was the performance on the WIDA system. And we said, well, maybe the indicators that we determined were not appropriate. And we went back and we looked at that, and we then asked the U.S. the task force reviewed the scores, the performance of the schools, other metrics nationally, and determined that what we had said in our plan, our ESSA plan, wasn't appropriate for the WIDA assessment. And we went back and modified our state plan to change the score that we were using to determine proficiency for the English language. So it is something that needs to continuously happen to because this is growing, this is changing. You change the definition for an adequate education because you add things like personal literacy in. And so the other one, that when maybe the original PBAS was determined, that wasn't something. So the task force would need to say, all right, well, how do we ensure that the school is providing an adequate education and appropriately measuring its performance of providing personal financial literacy? And so that's what the task force would need to do, and it doesn't go away.
Oh, okay, can I follow up just one?
Yes.
Okay, because when I envision a task force, it has a task, it does the task, it gets this thing this PBAS assessment and passes it on. But this is actually going to continue. It's going to be many tasks force.
Correct. Well, I mean, because the law is always changing. So if you were going to say you're never going to change the definition of adequate education ever again, the task force could probably dissolve. But because it's constantly changing, because assessments are constantly changing, because everything is constantly changing, the task force needs to be there. And it's really an advisory group of practitioners that help the department, because the department has one responsibility for implementing the accountability systems, the assessments, and everything like that. And then the schools have a very different piece of actually assessing the kids, collecting the data, everything like that. And so it works together hand in hand. The department can't do its work without the schools, and the schools can't do its work without the department. So
Further questions of Caitlin? Did a good job. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for coming. Well, Caitlin, we always appreciate when you come from the department, because you give us a clear picture, whether we agree or not. It's always welcomed.
and I know, at least from Nate and I and my other staff, we appreciate the time too, because we we do very important work at the department, mostly because you guys have told us to do the work someplace in law.
Yeah.
And we appreciate being able to discuss the work we're doing and get the input of the committee. And so we always appreciate these conversations.
I just wish you had gotten that data analyst that we tried to put forward.
I wish we had as well, but
Yeah.
next budget, right? There's
Next
another
budget,
biennium budget coming up sooner rather than later, so.
We passed it unanimously out of here. It was killed in Division 2. Or Finance, not Division 2, Finance. Yep. Well, thank you very much for coming. We're going to take a short break here. And I don't know if we should even start addressing that other bill yet. You can have, that's an extra one that I had. Pardon me? Oh, you have one in the office, go ahead. Okay, thank you for, let's discuss, we had one other bill scheduled for review. I don't know if we have the time to do it before lunch, or we just can have a lunch break now. We don't have a great rush to have to deal with. It's not an early bill, so we have some time here. So let's just take a break now and come back at 1 o'clock when we're scheduled to go forward with the other part of the docket for today. And that's what we're looking at, executing some bills here. 378, 526, 339. Obviously, and looking at that right now, I don't think we're prepared to exec 378. We just talked that, and there's obviously some amending language. 526, let's see, school, we haven't just talked that, and that leaves SB 339, or the bills which we didn't do yesterday. We had two bills which we didn't, and both of those need work too. So is there any need for us to come back this afternoon? Pardon me?
That's the question.
Yeah. I would say we're not going to be acting on anything this afternoon. It's probably wise, after this conversation here, we're not prepared to go forward with 378. So with that, I don't think we need to come back this afternoon.
Why would we not do 339?
Well, I mean,
Unless we're prepared to go forward and discuss it. No, I'm not, we can't do it right now. If we're gonna come back at 1 o'clock, the only one we would do is possibly this and anything we didn't do from yesterday.
But it's not required to get done immediately.
That's right. Well, let's come back at 1 o'clock and discuss that latter bill that we see there.
339.
339. We can also discuss 526 because we can open up an exec session and then have a discussion on it. And if we're not ready to go forward with that, as if we see amending language needed, we can, put that off as well. But it's an opportunity to discuss. So we will come back at 1 o'clock. Yes.
So are we waiting for an amendment on Senate Bill 378? Is that why we can't act on that this
I think
afternoon?
we're
Working on an amendment.
working on,
Okay.
based upon what we discussed today.
Okay,
There are some things we can add, I
Yeah.
think, to strengthen the bill. Yeah.
So, Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Four of us are gonna work on that amendment.
We should work together on that.
Well, I'll put together a subcommittee, okay, to do that. Yeah.
378.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah.
All right, good.
Okay, thank you. Pardon me?
On 378?
How much do they spend on SB 266?
Usually their hearings are only 10 minutes, so they, went above and beyond.
Yeah, maybe we got more than we expected. Thank you. We'll meet at 1 o'clock. This part of the meeting's adjourned. Oh, that's right. Somebody's got.
Oh, yeah,
I forgot that.
I did too.
Oh,
Check, go downstairs, check.
I got, I'll let you in the car, but.
I do too. I got my cheese and crackers in the car.
Filters right out.
Courtney Tanner. That was the Tanner.
Oh, boy.
Today, leadership will be hosting lunch in the State House cafeteria.
Okay, for everybody in the room, what we're gonna do is, before we go into the exec session, we're gonna have a quick caucus right here. So you can go outside and look at everything you wanna look out the window at in another room. Because we're gonna go into caucus right now.
Our turn.
So now we all sit down and get up.
We need to find another room on this side of the building.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's a cornerstone to that building. Committee. I want to welcome all the public to the meeting here.
Sally Fellows sitting there.
Yeah, and we have going around the table here. Yeah, Representative Fellows is here. Representative Bogert's here. Well, I'm seeing Mary Heath as just a permanent member now. Yeah, and there's nobody going to my right. So welcome all. For today, we're going to try set some kind of record of getting out of here. And so I'm asking that we only have discussion from the maker of the bill or the motion and the second, if the second cares not to ditto what the maker of the motion said. So with that, we're going to jump over 378, seeing that we had a good discussion this morning and a work session on that. We know we're going to have some amending language, so we'll jump to the next bill, SB 526. This is a bill relative to public school facility condition assessment and school building aid grants for temperature control. And I look to Representative Belcher for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would move ITL.
Is there a second?
Second.
So we have a motion by Representative Belcher to ITL, and that's second by Representative Cordelli. Representative Belcher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as you said, this bill would seek to establish studies and look to give grants for significantly improved air conditioning systems in schools. But some significant concerns were raised within this. We're looking at the cost. There's very intensive studies that are mandated to be conducted at all schools within this bill. And there's also some, frankly, unworkable provisions, it seems to me, when it comes to the requirement that a classroom be entirely shuttered should the temperature fall to 59 degrees Fahrenheit. So for those reasons, I would recommend we don't move forward.
Representative Cordelli.
Thank you. I just wanted to add on to that, the air quality is already in law. So there's no need to duplicate that portion of it. And we've heard stories from the chairman about his days gone by with winter clothes on heating units in his school, and the wonderful aroma later in the day. And I think we can get past those kinds of stories these days without this bill.
Okay, not seeing any further discussion. Oh, yes, Representative Luno.
Sure, thanks. I'm also going to be supporting the ITL motion on this, but not because I don't think that the intent of the bill isn't spot on. I do think kids learn better in an environment where they're comfortable, where they're not sweating, where they're not freezing, where they're not boiling, and stuff like that. But I think there's also a lot of things within the school that can be done to improve student outcomes. One of which I think we've had a lot of conversation about around this table, and we'll have more tomorrow, is making sure kids are adequately fed and aren't hungry in school. And I think if the state's going to be pushing money, whether that's done at the local level or from the state level, to helping kids learn better, that would be the place to direct our next dollars.
Thank you very much. Any further discussion? Not seeing any. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Vice Chairman Cordelli.
Yes.
Representative Lekis.
Yes.
Representative Belcher.
Yes.
Representative Dry, yes. Representative McDonald.
Yes.
Representative Noble.
Yes.
Representative Peternell.
Yes.
Representative Bogert.
Yes.
Representative Terry.
Yes.
Representative Myler.
Yes.
Representative Cornell.
Yes.
Representative Tanner.
Yes.
Representative Luno.
Yes.
Representative Heath.
Yes.
Representative Fellows.
Yes.
Representative Hall.
Yes.
Representative Balboni.
Yes.
Representative Cascadden.
Yes.
Representative Damon.
Yes.
And Chairman Ladd.
Yes.
20 yeas, no nays.
Consent okay? Thank you very much. I'll remind the makers, you have to get the committee report, a blurb in before we leave today. Going on to the next bill, SB 339. relative to repealing the graduation requirement regarding free application for federal student aid FAFSA applications. I look to Representative Noble for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move ITL.
We have a motion made by Representative Noble, that is ITL, and a second by Representative Myler. Representative Noble?
Yep. We had a House bill that also repeals FAFSA, but the difference is the House bill added a school board policy for providing information to families about FAFSA. So I think most of us probably feel that that is a better bill because we don't want to diminish the importance of FAFSA.
Further comments? Alrighty, are you ready? Okay, Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Vice Chairman Cordelli,
Yes.
Representative Lekis,
Yes.
Representative Belcher,
Yes.
Representative Dry, yes, Representative McDonald,
Yes.
Representative Noble,
Yes.
Representative Petronell,
Yes.
Representative Bogert,
Yes.
Representative Terry,
Yes.
Representative Myler,
Yes.
Representative Cornell, Representative Tanner,
Yes.
Representative Luno,
Yes.
Representative Heath,
Yes.
Representative Fellows,
Yes.
Representative Hall,
Yes.
Representative Balboni,
Yes.
Representative Cascadden,
Yes.
Representative Damon,
Yes.
Chairman Ladd.
Yes,
20 yeas, no nays.
thank you. And we'll put it on consent. So that really takes care of the bills we had in the docket for this afternoon. I hope the subs enjoyed it. One comment for everybody here, what our schedule looks like for next week. I've been informed I should not schedule anything Monday because there's a baseball game on.
That's true.
Important stuff.
Big game.
So Tuesday, we will be meeting. And Tuesday, we're going to start at 9:30, and we're going to have two hearings that morning. One of them is on 219, Senate Bill 219. That's a bill requiring mandatory reporting by school districts of school expenses. That'll go for 45 minutes. Then at 10:15, we'll pick up the second bill, and that's 379. That's relative to emergency action plans for sports-related injuries. So 219, 379 that morning, and then at 11 o'clock, we have a subcommittee that's going to be meeting and dealing with 378 and trying to work out an amendment for that particular bill. So that's all we'll be doing on Tuesday. Wednesday appears to be off, and Thursday, we have session?
Maybe.
Maybe, depending upon what, I guess, they got cranked up for, well, how much they have received.
What time did you say, 9:30?
9:30. And then on Friday, we have nothing there as well. So it looks like a pretty good week. So, enjoy it, and thank you very much, and see everybody tomorrow. Yep.